to Cindy's library. This is Cindy. Sorry I skipped last week, but with only 2 books, I felt it wasn't quite worth it to talk about those. But I have more to talk about this week, and I'm very excited. So let's get started. First of all, I read On the Way Home by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Diary of a Trip from South Dakota to Mansfield, Missouri in 1894, with some comments and basically an ending by Rose Wilder Lane, her daughter. So this was when the Wilders moved from South Dakota to Mansfield, Missouri, where they ended up living basically for the rest of their lives. So kind of interesting. Lots of talk about the weather and how the crops look as they pass by farms, and talking about the towns, and even because you could consider them more cities as they pass through them. So I am glad I read it. I also finally finished Privacy and Confidentiality, Prospectus, Archives, and Archival Records. This was actually rather interesting. Now, the first part does go over a lot about the legal foundations and aspects of privacy, but then it gets into a bunch of case laws, well, not laws, but a bunch of cases where librarians and archivists had to figure out the best way to have the widest access possible while still preserving privacy. So glad I read that one. Then I read The Uncommon Reader by Alen Bennet. This was interesting. I am glad I read it. He did a great job with Queen Elizabeth II, who of course is the uncommon reader. Basically, unbeknownst to her, there's a little traveling library that stops at, is it Windsor? Probably. Every week or two. Her corgis, of course, lead her to it, and while she isn't initially a reader, she ends up falling in love with reading and how that affects her, the people around her. So, very interesting premise, like what they did with Queen Elizabeth II. And I will say she does become indeed a good reader. But the flavor of this was a little too modern for me in tone. So there is that. Then I also got the Digital Preservation Essentials, edited by Christopher J. Prom. So this is basically what it says on the tin. Of course, it's 10 years out of date now, but fortunately the basic principles at least should definitely still apply, even if a lot has changed in the digital world, even in 10 years. Hard to believe. But the main reason I didn't get more or other stuff done is because I finished the first half, basically, of Dombey and Son last Saturday, and then it was a race to the finish over the next 4 days, basically, and I absolutely loved it. Is it my favorite Dickinson or my favorite Dickens? I'm not sure I can quite say that, even though I love it so much. In structure, it is not as complicated as Our Mutual Friend, And as much as I love Florence, I think I love Little Dorrit more. As a character, I should say. It's not really Florence's fault in a way, but she does spend a lot of her time being willfully blind to her father and how he really is. So the premise is we have Mr. Dombey, and his pride and joy in life is his business, Dombey and Sons, through which his father and now he has amassed great wealth. And so the thing he wants most in life is to be able to pass it on to his own son. And joyfully for him, at least, he does have a son in the very first chapter, Paul, who's, although sadly his mother dies pretty much immediately after his birth, or very shortly after his birth. We are also introduced to Florence. See, Mr. Dombey actually has a daughter, I think about 6 years older than Paul, and Mr. Dombey sadly does not recognize her at all. And so that is the whole reason why this is called Dombey and Son. But in a way, this might be more appropriate to name the Patience of Florence or something along those lines, because we see her growing up, we see Paul growing up, and her being completely ignored by their father, except in as much as Paul's interest in Florence, because fortunately he does love his sister and she loves him, forces him to rather recognize Florence. And I am not sure that I can say much more about the main plot than that. I will say, well, we get several points of view, though not nearly as complicated as our mutual friend. But the main one is Walter Gay. He's probably yet again maybe 4 or 5 years older than Florence. He is an orphan. He's being raised by his uncle, Uncle Sol, who has a ship instrument shop which no one has actually bought anything from in forever. And so he's going to have to make his way more in the world. And his path crosses with Florence, and the people he is connected to, they connect with Florence, and Florence connects with them, and things go on from there. So that would say is probably the secondary strand, and I probably can't say anything more about that because of spoilers. But Dombey and Sons is so amazing. I said for our mutual friend that the ending was so fairy tale. Well, Dombey and Sons is basically a fairy tale straight through. We have Florence, who is a princess, but she is the rejected princess. Her father is acting basically like the wicked uncle. Now, without actually saying what happened, you see his transformation from the wicked uncle to the impotent father. And metaphorically speaking, the ending is all about redemption. And as for Walter, You can't say he's exactly the orphan of unknown origins, but he is an orphan who's going to have to make his way in the world, and he has the orphan or the youngest son's luck, of course. And it is just so beautiful and amazing a story. I couldn't put it down once I was halfway through. I'm not sure I can quite put it above Little Dorrit, and I can't decide whether I like Little Dorrit or Our Mutual Friend better at this point. But so, so, so amazing. So, I can say I have read Dombey and Sons now, which means I'm not quite halfway through, but I am approaching halfway through Charles Dickens's novels, which means I have finished my Charles Dickens for the year if I decide to do that. If I do end up feeling in a Dickens mood come Victober, then I am going to choose something relatively short, probably Oliver Twist or maybe A Tale of Two Cities. Probably one of those two. A lot of the others are still a decent size. Although Great Expectations is only closer to 500 pages, so we'll have to see about that. And I may decide this is my Charles Dickens for the year. Supposed to read it last year, but we did Mutual Friend instead. And I've been dying to get to Dombey and Sons since, and I have. And it was good. So that is my reading for the past 2 weeks. Well, what am I working on? Let's see, I have started The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery for my book group. I'm also in the middle of A Natural Death, Lord Peter Wimsey Mystery by Dorothy L. Sayers. So Blue Castle is the story of Valency, called Das by her family. Her life is perfectly miserable, but then she gets news that changes her life completely, or rather causes her to change her life completely. A Natural Death, Lord Peter and Inspector Parker, they are talking about the risk of doctors even suggesting something could be murder, and a doctor overhears them and tells them his story. And Lord Peter, at least, he thinks maybe there's something to it, so he starts investigating, of course. I'm in the middle of Farmer Boy 2, which is when Alonzo Wilder was 9 years old, and we hear all about what it was like for him to be a farmer boy. I think, yeah. Oh, yes. I'm at least 100 pages in through the correspondence between John and Abigail Adams, which I was reading for Epistolary January. We'll have to see what happens with that, if I continue or not. Audiobook, it's Feb Regency. I was going to do The Heart of Midlothian by Sir Walter Scott, but it's not on audio. The Antiquary is now on audio, though, also by Sir Walter Scott. So I'll probably be listening to that for the rest of the month. And I think that's probably enough to get started with at this point. To finish February out. And I'll probably throw in a couple more things, but who knows? So, how has your January reading ended up, and how has your February reading started? Love to hear all about it below. Thank you so much for stopping by. I truly do appreciate it. So until next time, I hope we all stay safe and healthy. And as always, happy reading.